Shantae Turner stood at the gate, a silent storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. The hum of the busy airport terminal surrounded her. Footsteps, flight announcements, murmurs of passengers, but none of it registered. She was staring at the her flight crew, preparing to board her private jet to an important corporate summit. The team was supposed to be polite professional, but instead the smug, dismissive glances they exchanged behind her back spoke volumes. She could feel it in her gut. The cold, biting stares, the subtle mutters just low enough to avoid being overheard, but too loud to ignore. A low, clipped voice broke her reverie, the flight attendant's gaze sweeping over her, as if appraising a child rather than the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech company. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can you step aside? You're holding up the boarding process." Shantae's heart clenched at the condescension in her tone, the subtle order that dripped from it. She was used to being underestimated, dismissed, but something about today, their gaze, their air, made her feel small in a way that was both cruel and deliberate. As she stepped forward, her heels clicking with confidence, she heard the whisper that sealed it. "Can't believe a black woman owns a company like this." Her world shifted. For a second, she thought she might let it slide, just walk past, pretend it didn't hurt, didn't matter. But as the words settled in her mind, rage bloomed. They had no idea who they were dealing with. "This ends now." With one sharp motion, she turned and marched back to the desk, stopping the manager mid-sentence. "Fire them," she said, her voice cold. "All of them." Shantae Turner's mind was preoccupied with the upcoming conference. The first female black CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech company. She had worked hard to be here, to stand at the top, and nothing was going to derail her. Not today. Not ever. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished airport floor as she walked toward the private jet terminal. Her security detail discreet, but ever-present. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a reminder of the various conference calls waiting for her attention. She ignored it, focusing instead on the task at hand. The flight, a long, uninterrupted few hours to prepare for her speech, to outline the final details. As she neared the gate, her flight attendant stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, checking in passengers. The jet was ready, but something felt off. There was a tension in the air that wasn't just the usual pre-flight buzz. Shantae caught the flicker of a glance between two attendants, their eyes narrowing ever so slightly when they saw her. She didn't think much of it until the flight attendant addressed her. "Excuse me, ma'am," the woman said, her voice light but cold. "Can you step aside? You're holding up the boarding process." Shantae's brow furrowed. She hadn't been holding up anything. She stood there, poised, ready to board like any other passenger. But the tone, the clipped authority behind it, made her pause. She didn't answer immediately, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling creeping up her spine. "I'm the CEO of Turner Tech," she finally said, her voice calm but firm, showing no signs of discomfort. "I'm here for my flight." The attendant barely glanced at her, rolling her eyes before raising her voice. "Yeah, well, can you move, please? You're not the only one here." The words felt like a slap. The dismissiveness, the lack of recognition, was a sharp sting that made Shantae's chest tighten. "Excuse me," she repeated, her voice controlled, yet the rising fury beneath was unmistakable. And then, louder than before, she heard it. "Can't believe a black woman owns a company like this," one of the other attendants muttered, just loud enough for Shantae to catch. Her breath caught, her vision blurred for a second, and she had to fight to stay grounded. The insult, delivered with such casual cruelty, burned deeper than anything she had ever faced. She was used to microaggressions, used to the quiet dismissals, the subtle racism. But this was different. Shantae didn't say a word. She turned sharply, walking away from the boarding area, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what she was feeling, anger, disbelief, humiliation. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let this go. Her hand reached for her phone, and within seconds, she was dialing the head of her company's legal team. "Get me the manager of this airline," she demanded, "and I want the whole team fired. Now." The conversation ended abruptly. and within moments, a representative from the airline called back, attempting to apologize profusely. But the damage was done. "Fire them," Shantae said, her voice as cold as ice. "All of them. I want them gone." As she walked out the terminal, her chest heavy with a mix of disbelief and outrage, Shantae knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about the flight anymore. It was about making sure this never happened to anyone again. And that was a fight she was willing to take all the way to the top. Shantae sat in the back of her sleek, black limousine as it sped through the city streets, her fingers nervously tapping against the armrest. The day had barely begun, but already it felt like everything was slipping through her fingers. The phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket, yet she couldn't bring herself to answer. Every notification, every message, felt like a reminder of the storm she had unleashed, one she wasn't sure she was ready for. Her legal team had already sent out a statement, outlining the incident in stark detail. The airline had been quick to issue an apology, but the damage was far from undone. News outlets were picking up the story, framing it as a misunderstanding or a poor judgment call. But to Shantae, it wasn't just about one moment of careless prejudice. It was a microcosm of something much larger, a systematic problem within the industry, one that mirrored the injustices she had faced throughout her career. She could hear the buzz of her phone again. This time, she answered, pressing the device to her ear with a sigh. "Shantae," a familiar voice said. It was Marissa, her best friend and confidant. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," Shantae replied, her voice shaking despite her attempt at composure. I thought it was just going to be one of those things I could let slide, you know? But when I heard what they said, I couldn't. I won't." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You're doing the right thing," Marissa said, her tone firm. "But the world is going to watch. You know that, right?" "I know," Shantae replied, her voice soft. "I just didn't expect it to blow up like this." As if on cue, the sound of her phone buzzing again interrupted their conversation. She checked the screen. It was a headline from one of the bigger news outlets. "CEO fires entire airline staff after racial insult. Was it too much?" Shantae's stomach twisted as she scrolled down, reading the comments. The outpouring of support was substantial, but the backlash was just as fierce. Critics were quick to condemn her for what they labeled an overreaction. Some accused her of playing the race card. Others argued that it was a personal matter and not something that should involve the public. Too harsh. Too dramatic. Should have handled this behind closed doors. One comment read. Another. She's overreacting. Does she really think that this is worth all the drama? Shantae's thumb hovered over the screen as she read more. She had expected criticism, but the wave of condemnation still stung. It wasn't just about her. It was about her race. "Why does it always come back to race?" she muttered to herself, more frustrated than before. The limo pulled up to the sleek glass building of her company's headquarters. As she stepped out, the world seemed to slow down, as if everyone around her was waiting for her next move. She walked into the building, her heels tapping against the marble floor, the sound sharp and echoing in the otherwise silent lobby. The staff in the reception area offered her nervous smiles, but none dared to speak. Shantae's assistant, Monica, approached her quickly. "The media is relentless," she said, voice laced with concern. "They're calling every 5 minutes. We need to prepare for a press conference." "I'm not doing a press conference," Shantae said firmly, shaking her head. "Not until we figure out what's really going on. This isn't about me anymore. This is bigger than some airline incident." Monica hesitated but nodded. "Okay, but you know the board is going to want to talk. They're already upset." Shantae's gaze hardened as she entered her office, her mind racing. The tension was thick in the air, the pressure mounting. She was no stranger to media scrutiny, but this was something different. She knew the public eye would be on her every move, watching to see if she would buckle, if she would back down. The phone rang again. Shantae answered without looking at the caller ID. She already knew who it would be. "Shantae," a low voice on the other end said, "this is Brad from the airline. We need to talk about the situation. I want to personally apologize." "Apologize?" Shantae interrupted, her voice sharp. Your apology means nothing to me, Brad. This isn't about one flight attendant or one slip-up. It's about a culture. A culture I'm not willing to tolerate anymore. Look, I understand your frustration, Brad said, his voice uncomfortably calm. But maybe we can work something out. We don't want this to escalate any further. You know how this works, right? We can handle this privately, take care of things behind the scenes. Shantae's grip tightened around the phone. The nerve of him. This isn't about making a deal, Brad. This is about making sure this kind of thing never happens again. So no, I'm not dropping this. Brad sighed, but Shantae could hear the faint edge of anger in his voice now. You're making a mistake. Shantae, this isn't how you want to play this. The board is watching. The media is watching. Do you really want to risk it all over one incident? One incident. Shantae closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had heard it all before. The threats wrapped in offers, the implications of loss, the quiet insistence that she fall in line. But this time, it wasn't just about her career. It was about justice. It was about making sure that the next time a black CEO walked into an airport, they wouldn't have to fight for their dignity. I've made my decision, Shantae said, and I'm not backing down. She hung up the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. The battle had only just begun. Shantae stared out her office window, watching the early morning sun paint the city skyline in shades of gold. It was a beautiful view, one that had been the backdrop to countless moments of triumph over the years. Yet, today it seemed distant, as though everything she had worked for was now under threat. The weight of her decision lingered heavily on her shoulders. She had fought for years to be where she was, to break through barriers no one thought a black woman could surpass. But now, in the wake of the scandal, it felt like all her progress could crumble with just a few misplaced moves. Her phone buzzed again, bringing her back to the present. It was a text message from Marissa. Have you seen the board's response yet? Shantae sighed, rolling her eyes before typing back a quick reply. I'll deal with them when the time comes. For now, I'm staying focused. She tossed the phone onto her desk and turned back to view, her thoughts racing. The airline wasn't the only enemy she was facing. It was the system, the corporate hierarchy that had always worked to keep her in check. She knew that behind the veil of polite apologies, there were unseen forces at play. People with power, who had their own agendas, would do whatever it took to silence her. Shantae's gut told her this wasn't going to end with an apology. There was too much at stake, and too many high-level executives with too much to lose. She had known this was coming. She just hadn't expected it to hit so fast. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from her legal counsel. She picked it up, her tone measured. Shantae, came the voice of her attorney, Alan. The airline's legal team reached out. They're asking for a private meeting to discuss resolution. They're offering a financial settlement with the condition that you stop the public campaign. Shantae's breath caught in her throat. A settlement? It's standard protocol. They're trying to buy you out, quiet everything down. They're also suggesting you have the option to move forward without causing more damage. She could practically hear the smug confidence in Alan's voice, but there was no mistaking the hesitation there. This was their way of handling it. Throw money at the problem until it went away. Shantae stood up abruptly, pacing the length of her office. This isn't about money, Alan. It's about accountability. The moment I take that settlement, it's over. They win. This becomes just another case where they buy their way out of a mess. I understand, Alan said quietly, but they have a lot of resources behind them. You know what that means. They're going to fight back, and they'll hit hard. The media storm is already getting bigger. The pressure is going to mount. Shantae felt a sharp pang in her chest. It wasn't the first time she had been told to back down. As a woman of color in the business world, she had been told countless times to compromise, to soften her stance, to make peace for the sake of everyone else's comfort. But peace had never built anything. No, she said firmly. I'm not going to let this go. They need to understand that they can't treat people this way anymore. Alan sighed. I'll send the paperwork for the next steps. You know what you're up against. Yeah, I know, Shantae replied. She disconnected the call and turned back to her desk. Her reflection in the glass seemed like a stranger. This wasn't the woman who had risen to the top of a Fortune 500 company, not the woman who had proven herself time and again. The toll of the fight was starting to show, the bags under her eyes, the weight on her shoulders, the growing isolation. Her friends, her allies, all had their own concerns. She couldn't blame them for urging her to step back, but Shantae knew she couldn't. Not now. She walked over to her computer and opened up her inbox, reviewing the messages that had piled up overnight. Most were routine, but a few caught her attention. There were emails from key players within her company, the board members she had built her company with, many of whom had known about the microaggression she had faced, but remained silent. Shantae opened one of the messages, this one from her CFO, Rob. His tone was polite, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of tension. Shantae, I think we need to talk about this situation with the airline. While I completely support you, I believe we need to focus on damage control at this stage. The board is concerned about your public image, and frankly, we can't afford any further complications. Shantae's stomach turned. Damage control. That was corporate speak for don't rock the boat. She had spent years building a reputation, one that had never been based on appeasing people who didn't understand her. Now, it seemed like her own board was trying to push her back into the box they had created for her. She closed the email with a sigh and stood up, walking toward the window again. Below, the city moved in a blur, each person living their own story, their own battle. But this was hers. The office door opened, and Monica walked in, her expression grim. We have a problem. Shantae turned to face her. What now? Words getting around that the airline might retaliate. There's talk of pulling our flights from certain major cities. They've got influence, Shantae. They're not going to go down quietly. Shantae's heart skipped. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it real. The stakes were getting higher, and she could feel the pressure rising. We're going to fight this, Monica, Shantae said, her voice resolute. This isn't just about one airline or one flight. It's about exposing how deep this runs. And if they want to pull our flights, let them. I'll take that fight to every corner of this industry. Monica nodded, her expression softening for a moment. All right, let's do it. You know I'm with you. Shantae turned back to the window, the weight of her decision settling heavily on her shoulders. She had never asked for the fight, but now that it had found her, there was no going back. The days after Shantae's decision were filled with a flurry of activity. Media coverage exploded, and the battle lines were drawn. She had quickly become a symbol of resistance for some and a villain for others. The weight of it all was a constant pressure, but she never flinched. Her resolve had solidified into something stronger. She wasn't going to let this moment slip by. Her office was a hive of movement as legal teams, PR advisors, and her closest allies worked tirelessly. Shantae sat at her desk, her mind never fully at rest. She glanced through her emails again, this time noticing a note from a former employee, now an activist, who had worked closely with her on diversity initiatives. Shantae, I know you're in the middle of something huge right now, but if you need support, I'm here. This is a fight for all of us. Let me know if you want to take this beyond the airline. We have your back. It was moments like these that made her realize how far-reaching this issue was. She wasn't fighting alone. The support was overwhelming, and it kept her going. But as much as she felt the solidarity, there were whispers behind closed doors from her own team, whispers that carried the unmistakable scent of doubt. As she walked through the bustling lobby of Turner Tech's headquarters, she could feel the tension in the air. Monica met her at the elevator, her expression tight with concern. The board wants to meet with you. They're worried about how all this is affecting our company. There's talk of a potential PR disaster. Shantae sighed but said nothing. The board's message had been clear. The company's bottom line was at risk, and the spectacle she had ignited wasn't helping anyone. Shantae didn't blame them for being concerned, but the pressure to suppress her actions, to soften her stance, was something she was growing increasingly tired of. She stepped into the conference room, where the board members were waiting. They were all there, Rob, the CFO, Janet, the head of legal, and Charles, the chairperson. Their faces were a mixture of concern and frustration. They had expected the media storm, but they hadn't expected Shantae to be so relentless. "Shantae," Charles began, his voice measured but firm, "we need to talk about the consequences of your actions. The airline is now threatening to pull out of key markets where we have substantial investments. This could hurt Turner Tech's profitability." Shantae crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "And what exactly are you suggesting I do? Apologize? Pretend it didn't happen?" Janet spoke up, her voice tinged with urgency. "No, we're not saying that. But you have to understand this isn't just about one airline. It's about business. You're jeopardizing our company's future by making this a personal issue. Our investors are already concerned." Shantae's mind was spinning. The tension in the room was palpable, each person's words wrapped in coded language designed to push her toward compliance. They weren't concerned about the injustice. They were concerned about their numbers, their profits. "I understand the stakes," she said slowly, her voice low but filled with determination. "But this isn't just about my personal feelings. I'm not backing down because of some PR stunt. I'm fighting for what's right, for the people who are never given a voice." Rob, ever pragmatic one, leaned forward. "Look, we all know you've been under a lot of pressure lately. Maybe it's time to consider stepping back. Let us handle the public side of this while you focus on the company. That's the best course of action." Shantae's pulse quickened. She had heard it all before, the gentle nudges, the offers to help her find peace, to make everything go away. But it wasn't about peace. It was about silence, about letting the system keep running the way it always had, with her in the background. "No," Shantae said, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. "I won't let you bury this." Charles's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "You need to be careful, Shantae. These kinds of moves don't just go away. You're isolating yourself from people who should be your allies." "I'm not isolating myself," she shot back. "I'm standing up for what's right, whether it's popular or not. Maybe it's time for all of us to stop worrying about being liked and start worrying about doing the right thing." There was a long silence in the room as the board members exchanged looks. They weren't used to being challenged. Not by her. But as Shantae met their gazes, she knew there was no turning back. If they couldn't see the bigger picture, then they were part of the problem. "Shantae," Rob said, his tone more pleading than he intended, "you're a trailblazer. You've built this company from the ground up, but you're not invincible. Don't let your principles blind you to the reality of the situation. Don't throw everything away over this." Shantae felt the weight of his words, but she knew they were rooted in fear. Fear of change, fear of losing everything they had worked for. But she wasn't afraid. "Not anymore. I'm not throwing anything away, Rob. I'm building something. Something that matters," she said, her voice steady. "And if that means challenging everything we've built, then so be it." The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. No one said anything for a long moment, and Shantae could feel the collective tension rise. She was pushing them to the edge, and they knew it. Some of them would buckle, others would remain silent. But she knew one thing for sure. They would all remember this moment. The meeting ended without a resolution, just a lot of uneasy glances and unfinished sentences. As Shantae left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing something big. But it was something she had never truly had: control. When she got back to her office, her phone buzzed again. This time it was from Marissa. "How did it go?" Shantae looked at the message for a moment, her fingers hovering over the screen. She could have lied, could have pretended everything was fine. But Marissa deserved the truth. "It's getting worse. But I'm not backing down. We're in this together." Marissa's reply came a moment later. "You've got this. Don't let them break you." Shantae stared at the words for a long time. For the first time in days, a small spark of hope flickered inside her. She wasn't alone. She had allies, people who understood, and together, they were going to bring this fight to its bitter end. The tension in the air felt thicker with each passing day. Shantae could practically taste it, a simmering mixture of pressure and uncertainty. Her company was facing mounting threats from every direction, and her stance against the airline was not just a battle for personal dignity anymore. It had become a war for justice, for a voice in a system that worked hard to silence people like her. But the corporate world was a battlefield of its own. And now, it seemed, the real fight was just beginning. Shantae's inbox was overflowing with demands, offers, and ultimatums. The calls came nonstop from her legal team, her PR team, and, of course, the airline's legal counsel. They had all been preparing for the inevitable retaliation, the backlash from the airline and the powerful stakeholder behind it. The airline was digging in its heels, threatening to escalate the issue with aggressive counter-lawsuits. They were also hinting at financial retaliation, possibly pulling sponsorships from Turner Tech's high-profile tech summit next year. Shantae paced the length of her office, running her fingers through her hair. It had only been a few days since the fallout, but it felt like weeks. She knew what they were doing. The airline and their powerful allies were playing the game, throwing money at the situation, using their influence and trying to buy her silence. But this wasn't about money. Not for her. She was standing on principle, something the industry didn't understand. Her phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number, but Shantae already knew who it was. Shantae, the voice on the other end was calm, too calm, the kind of smooth voice you heard from corporate lawyers trying to make a deal. This is Brad again from the airline. I think we need to have a serious conversation. Shantae, clench your jaw. I'm listening. Good. Look, we're trying to be reasonable here, Brad said, the words dripping with false concern. But you need to understand the kind of damage you're causing to both companies. Our stock prices are being affected, and the media circus is only getting worse. I think you can see where this is heading. It's not in anyone's best interest for this to continue. Shantae scoffed. What's in your best interest, Brad? Silencing me? Buying me out with money? Not at all, he said quickly, almost too quickly. It's not about that. It's about finding a way to resolve this before it gets out of hand. We're offering you a seat on a special advisory board with some of the biggest players in the industry. A chance to make real change. Shantae, you know as well as I do that you're at the top of your game right now. This could help everyone. Shantae's heart thundered in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She'd been prepared for this kind of offer. A seat at the table, where the power players made decisions without ever truly seeing the people those decisions affected. She had seen it too many times in her career. I don't need a seat at your table, Brad, she said, her voice low but firm. I'm not playing this game anymore. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Brad's voice grew more clipped. You really want to go down this road? You're isolating yourself. Shantae, the board's already on edge, and if you keep this up, you might find yourself without the backing you think you have. You're about to lose a lot more than just this airline. Shantae could almost hear the threat beneath his words, the veiled promise of destruction. She knew exactly what he meant. Without the board's backing, her position as CEO would be compromised. The very foundation of Turner Tech, the company she had built from the ground up, could crumble. I'm not afraid of losing this company, Brad, she said, her voice steady, though her hands gripped the edge of the desk tightly. Because what I'm fighting for is bigger than a boardroom full of scared, white men who are more concerned with profits than people. If you think I'm going to sit back and let you dictate how this ends, then you don't know me at all. There was silence on the other end. Shantae could practically feel the weight of Brad's disbelief. He hadn't expected her to refuse. No one had. You're making a huge mistake, he said finally, the words laced with venom. Maybe, but I'm willing to risk it. With that, Shantae hung up the phone, feeling a sudden weight lift off her shoulders. It was one of those moments where the decision was final, irreversible. She had drawn a line in the sand, and there was no going back. But as much as she relished the feeling of control, a sharp, nagging fear crept up on her. The airline wasn't the only powerful entity in play. Behind the scenes, there were bigger fish, corporate executives, politicians, and influential figures in the industry who would do whatever it took to keep the status quo. Shantae wasn't just fighting the airline anymore. She was taking on an entire system. Later that afternoon, she met with her senior leadership team to discuss the next steps. The tension was palpable in the room, their eyes wary as Shantae entered, her expression resolute. Monica, always a level-headed one, broke the silence. We've seen the airline's response. They're not backing down. They're threatening to not just pull flights, but also launch a smear campaign against us. We need to prepare for the fallout. Shantae nodded slowly. I expected this, but we can't back down. We stand firm. This isn't just about fighting the airline. It's about showing the world that we're not afraid to challenge these systems. Rob, the CFO, spoke up reluctantly. And what if the board doesn't back you? What if they pull out? Shantae's eyes met his with a steady gaze. Then I'll walk away. We'll build this company back from the ground up, but we won't do it by playing their game. We do it on our terms. There was a long pause in the room. Shantae could feel the weight of their doubt, but she knew the truth. If she was going to win this battle, it would be because she refused to compromise. She refused to accept a world that tried to tell her she didn't belong. We fight, she said again, this time more forcefully. We fight for everyone who's been told they don't belong, for every person of color who's been silenced, for every woman who's been overlooked. This is our moment. Monica stood up first, her voice strong. We're with you, Shantae. We fight with you. One by one, the others joined in. They might not all fully understand the scope of what she was up against, but they knew one thing for sure. Shantae wasn't going to let the system break her, not without a fight. The days were starting to blend together for Shantae. Each morning began with the same grim routine, a barrage of calls, press requests, legal threats, and boardroom meetings. The weight of it all felt like a physical presence, sitting on her chest, pressing down with unrelenting pressure. Her resolve had not wavered, but the emotional cost was becoming impossible to ignore. Her office was dark, the only light coming from the city skyline stretching out before her. The windows that once symbolized success, a view of everything she had worked so hard for, now seemed like a prison. She stood at her desk, staring blankly at the digital clock on her computer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The thought of another media statement, another round of spin, made her head spin. Monica knocked softly before entering, holding a stack of papers. Shantae, she began, her voice hesitating. There's been another wave of media backlash. The press is focusing on you. You're a disruption of the status quo. They're calling it. Some people are starting to question your judgment. Shantae closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had expected this. The press wasn't just attacking her actions anymore. They were questioning her very ability to lead. They weren't interested in the fight for justice. They wanted drama, conflict, something they could sell to masses. Give me a moment, Shantae replied, her voice quieter than usual. She needed a few minutes to compose herself. As much as she wanted to scream, to throw things, to let the overwhelming emotion escape, she couldn't. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. The door clicked shut behind Monica as she left. But the silence in the room only seemed to amplify the noise in Shantae's mind. She sat back in her chair, staring at the empty space where her dreams had once lived, and wondered for the 100th time if she had made a mistake. The pressure was starting to seep into her personal life, too. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her younger brother, Jamal. Sis, I know this fight is important to you, but you've got to take care of yourself. You've been working nonstop for weeks. The family's worried. You haven't even called Mom in days. Shantae's chest tightened at the mention of their mother. She had barely spoken to her family since the incident. They knew what she was fighting for, but they didn't fully understand the toll it was taking. The conversations had become strained, distant, like everyone was walking on eggshells around her. She was too wrapped up in the fight to call her mother, too wrapped up in saving the world to see how much it was costing her personally. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Marissa, her closest friend and confidant. Shantae hesitated, then finally answered. Hey, Marissa said softly, her voice warm, but tinged with concern. I know things are crazy right now, but you need to take a break. You've been on overdrive, and it's not healthy. You can't keep going like this. I don't have a choice, Shantae replied, her voice far more brittle than she intended. If I stop now, it'll all fall apart. I can't let them win. I get that. I really do. But you need to take care of yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. You're already running on fumes. Shantae was quiet for a moment. The words hit harder than she expected. She had always been one who pushed through, who kept going even when it felt impossible. But now, with everything unraveling around her, it felt like she was drowning. "I don't know how to stop, Marissa," Shantae whispered, a crack in her voice. "If I stop fighting, I'll lose everything. All of it. The company, the principles, my voice. I can't let them shut me down." "You're not going to lose everything," Marissa said firmly. "You've already won in so many ways, but you need to take a step back before you lose yourself." Shantae's throat tightened. She didn't want to admit it, but Marissa was right. She was losing herself. The lines between her personal life, her business, and the fight she had ignited were blurring, and she didn't know how to separate them anymore. "I'll think about it," she said softly. They talked for a few more minutes, but Shantae couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had built was now slipping through her fingers. Later that evening, Shantae walked into her apartment, the silence hitting her like a wave. The place was beautifully furnished, a testament to her success. But it was empty. She was alone. Her phone buzzed once more, but this time it was from her mother. "Sweetheart, I haven't heard from you in days. Please call me when you can. I know you're busy, but you're still my baby girl." Shantae sat down on the couch, staring at the message for a long time. The guilt weighed heavily on her. She was too caught up in the fight to realize how much she was isolating herself, how much she was pushing the people who loved her away. But this was her fight, her mission. She couldn't afford to show weakness. And yet, in this moment, sitting alone in her apartment, she wondered how much longer she could keep it up. The next morning, Shantae walked into her office with a new sense of resolve. She had spent the night reflecting, understanding that the battle wasn't just about the external forces trying to tear her down. It was about finding a balance, something she had neglected for far too long. She needed a fight, but she also needed to protect herself, her health, her relationships, her sanity. Monica greeted her with a wary smile as she entered her office. "How are you feeling today?" Shantae paused before answering. "Better," she said. "I'm going to keep fighting. But I need to be smarter about it. I'm not going to burn out." Monica nodded, her eyes softening with understanding. "That's good to hear." For the first time in days, Shantae allowed herself a small breath of relief. The fight wasn't over, but she had made a decision. She would keep going, but she would do it on her own terms. She was no longer just a fighter. She was a strategist. The days Shantae had been dreading arrived like a storm on the horizon. Quiet, almost imperceptible at first, but building in intensity with every passing moment. The phone calls, the emails, the media requests, they all reached a deafening crescendo. And at the center of it all, the airline's executives had made their move. The airline had called for an emergency meeting. Their lawyers had sent out a formal request, demanding that Shantae attend a private summit to discuss the terms of resolution. The message was clear. Either she came to the table and ended the standoff, or they would escalate things further, legally, financially, and publicly. Shantae sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over the screen of her phone. The email had come through just moments ago, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being backed into a corner. She knew this was their last attempt to get her to cave, to negotiate her silence. But everything she had fought for, everything she had built, was on the line now. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her office door. Monica stepped inside, her expression as tense as Shantae felt. "Shantae, I think it's time we have a serious conversation about this meeting. They're offering you a seat at the table, a position that comes with influence, with power, the kind of power that could protect you and Turner Tech from any further damage." Shantae didn't say anything for a long moment. She leaned back in her chair, staring out of the window. The city spread out before her, bustling and indifferent. She could feel the weight of all the choices pressing down on her. "They think they can buy me, Monica," Shantae said softly. "They think they can offer me a seat at their table, and I'll just accept. I'm supposed to be grateful for their benevolence, when all they're really doing is trying to keep me quiet." Monica's voice softened. "I get it. You've been offered the chance to make real change, a chance to influence the system from the inside. But I know you're not just doing this for yourself. You're doing this for everyone who's been silenced. And that's why I want to make sure you understand the stakes. Shantae rubbed her temples, feeling the headache that had been building for days intensify. I've been fighting for so long, Monica. I've sacrificed so much, but I don't know if I can keep doing this. Every time I take a step forward, I'm pushed 2 steps back. The public doesn't see the full story. The media, the board, they're all waiting for me to make a mistake. Monica didn't move, her gaze never leaving Shantae's. But you haven't made a mistake, Shantae. You've been doing exactly what you said you would. You're standing up against a system that has been built to keep people like you from succeeding. The real mistake would be to back down now. Shantae took a deep breath, her mind racing. Monica was right, of course. She had made it this far by being uncompromising, by refusing to accept the world as it was. She couldn't let herself go soft now, not when so much was on the line. But the moment of truth had come. She couldn't keep ignoring the cost, the emotional toll, the sleepless nights, the rift it was causing in her relationships, the constant scrutiny. For the first time in her life, Shantae was starting to wonder if there was a way to win without losing everything else. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, the caller ID flashed a name she knew all too well, the governor of California. Shantae had met with him only a few times, but he was influential, one of the people who could make or break a corporate battle like this. The voice on the other end was smooth, calculated. Shantae, the governor said, I've been following the situation closely. The truth is, the airline is a major player in our state's economy. We can't afford a prolonged battle. I'm offering you a chance to settle this quickly, out of the public eye. A negotiation, if you will. No one wants this to escalate further, especially not with the eyes of the nation on you. Shantae didn't hesitate. What are you offering? He was silent for a moment before continuing. A seat at the airline's advisory board. A place where you can make real decisions. This would also come with the support of my office. You would have influence, power, and a chance to ensure your future in the industry. This could all be over in a matter of days, with a very favorable outcome. Shantae felt her blood run cold. The offer was too good, too clean, too much like the one Brad had made. The stakes were too high for the governor to be this generous without expecting something in return. I'm not interested in settling for a seat at their table, Shantae said, her voice colder than she had intended. I've made my decision. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You really want to go down this road, Shantae? You're going to lose everything. You'll be the one who loses, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. Shantae swallowed hard, the pressure mounting as the reality of her choice hit her. But she knew what she had to do. I'm willing to risk everything, Shantae said, her voice steady. Because some things are more important than money, power, or influence. I won't be silenced. Not by the airline, not by you, and not by anyone else. The governor's voice turned icy. I'm sorry you feel that way. But don't say I didn't warn you. He hung up without another word. Shantae sat there for a long time, staring at her phone. The moment of truth had passed, and now there was no turning back. She had made her choice, but the feeling of dread lingered, gnawing at her insides. She could hear Monica's voice in her head. You're not alone in this fight. And she wasn't. The thought of her friends, her allies, the people who had stood by her, gave her the strength to press forward. She wasn't backing down. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her team. They were ready for the next move. Shantae stood, her resolve strengthening with each step she took. She had no illusions about the cost of the battle ahead, but she was ready to pay it. The day of the final showdown arrived sooner than Shantae had anticipated. Her body was exhausted, her mind strained beyond measure, but she had never been more resolute. Every step she took toward the conference room felt like a decision she had already made in her soul. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every marginalized person, every silent voice, every woman and person of color who had been dismissed or belittled by the system. The airline executives had been preparing for this day. They had prepared their defenses, their counterarguments, and their media strategies. But Shantae had prepared, too. The fight wasn't just against the airline. It was against the entire corporate structure, against a system that had allowed such treatment to persist for so long. Her team had gathered in the boardroom of Turner Tech's headquarters, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Monica stood at her side, her presence a reminder that, despite the pressure mounting, Shantae wasn't alone. "We're ready," Monica said, her voice low but firm. "Everything is in place. Legal has the filings ready. The press is already briefed, and we got statements lined up." Shantae nodded, her face a mask of resolve. "Let's do it." As they made their way into the conference room, the tension in the air was almost palpable. The airline's legal team and top executives were already seated, their faces tense and professional. But Shantae could see the strain in their eyes. They didn't expect her to be so relentless. And now, they were about to realize just how deep her resolve ran. Shantae walked ahead of the table, sitting across from the airline CEO, Marcus Cole. His cold, calculating eyes met hers, and for a split second, Shantae wondered if he would try to talk his way out of this. He was a master of corporate politics, a man who knew how to twist words, make promises, and play games. But today, Shantae wasn't here to play. She was here to win. "Shantae," Marcus began, his tone smooth and practiced. "I think we can agree that this situation has spiraled out of control. What you did by firing our staff was extreme, and has caused a lot of unnecessary damage to both our reputations. But we can still resolve this amicably. We put together a new proposal for you, one that involves a settlement that would satisfy both parties." Shantae met his gaze, feeling the weight of every word he was about to say, and the battle that still loomed ahead. "I don't want your settlement, Marcus. I don't need your money, your advisory board, or your empty promises. This isn't about compensation. It's about accountability. It's about holding you and your company responsible for what you've allowed to happen for years." The room fell silent. Even Marcus appeared momentarily caught off guard. The other executives exchanged uneasy glances, but Shantae didn't flinch. She had already made the decision to stand firm. "Do you realize the position you put us in?" Marcus pressed, his voice no longer calm, but tinged with frustration. "This is damaging to everyone involved. Do you think the public cares about your principles? No one cares about that. What they care about is their flight schedules, the service they receive, and whether their plans are disrupted. This isn't personal, Shantae. It's business." "And that," Shantae said, her voice cold and firm, "is exactly the problem. You've been treating people like me, like all of us, as if we are just business transactions, as if our value is only measured by what we can produce, what we can bring to the table. You see this as a game, a negotiation. But for me, this is about real consequences. This is about changing the way things have always been." The other executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Shantae could feel the weight of their discomfort, the realization that they had underestimated her from the very beginning. Marcus leaned forward, his gaze narrowing. "You don't understand the bigger picture, do you? This is about power, about control. You're making a foolish mistake. Shantae, you can't win this battle. The airline has too much influence, too many resources. Your company, your future, is at risk, and you're threatening to throw it all away for, what? A point to prove?" Shantae felt a surge of anger rising within her, but she swallowed it down. She had heard this line before. She had been told to back down countless times, told that she couldn't win, told that her place was just to accept things the way they were. But that had never been her path. "I know exactly what's at stake," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "And I'm willing to lose it all for the chance to make a real difference. If that makes me a fool, then I'm proud to be one. Because I'd rather lose everything trying to do the right thing than keep playing a game that's rigged against people like me." The tension in the room thickened. The airline executives were now visibly uncomfortable, their carefully crafted defenses crumbling before her. The reality of Shantae's resolve was beginning to sink in. This wasn't going to be a negotiation. This was a reckoning. "I'm not asking for your apology," Shantae continued. "I'm demanding that you take responsibility for the systemic problems that exist in your company. Your employees, your staff, have been conditioned to treat people like me as less than. That ends now. If you don't want this to be a public scandal, then I expect a full overhaul of your policies. a public apology, and the resignation of the people who perpetuated this culture. Her words hung in the air like a bomb, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Marcus shifted in his seat, his lips pressing into a thin line. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Shantae didn't flinch. Dead serious. For the first time in the meeting, there was a shift in the room. It was subtle but undeniable. The executives exchanged glances, and Shantae could see the wheels turning in their minds. The reality of the situation had set in. They were facing a woman who wasn't just standing up for herself, but for every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. "You won't win," Marcus said, his voice tight with frustration. "I already have," Shantae replied. "Because the moment you're forced to confront your own biases, to admit the truth, that's the beginning of real change." The meeting ended in silence, and Shantae could feel the weight of the battle shift. They had tried to break her, to buy her, to silence her, but they had failed. As she walked out of the conference room, her heart was pounding, but she couldn't help but feel a rush of triumph. The fight wasn't over, but it had shifted. The airline's power had faltered, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. Shantae wasn't just a CEO anymore. She was a symbol of resistance, of strength, and of the future that could be built when people refused to settle for the world that had always been. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind. Shantae had expected a difficult road ahead, but she hadn't anticipated the sheer force with which her actions would ripple through the system. The press coverage continued to intensify, but now the narrative was shifting. It wasn't just about her confrontation with the airline anymore. It was about systemic injustice, corporate corruption, and the fight for equity in spaces that had never been designed for people like her to succeed. Her victory in the meeting had been a critical turning point. The airline had tried to hold firm, but their resistance quickly faltered as public outrage grew. Investors began questioning their leadership. The media hounded their every move, and Shantae's demand for accountability became the rallying cry for millions who had been overlooked or treated as less than. But Shantae knew better than to let the external noise drown out the internal battle she was fighting. As much as the world cheered her on, she was still dealing with the consequences of standing firm, on her own terms. Inside her office, Shantae sat at her desk, staring at the piles of paperwork in front of her. The legal team had been working overtime to prepare for the next stage of the battle, a lawsuit. Shantae had gone public with her demands, and the airline had been forced to issue a statement acknowledging their failure to address institutional biases within their ranks. It was an apology, but it felt hollow, insincere. Shantae had expected nothing less. They had conceded to the pressure, but only because they had been backed into a corner. Her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She didn't need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. Alan, her legal counsel, had been working tirelessly to prepare for the next steps. "Shantae, the airline has agreed to the settlement terms," Alan said, his voice sharp with exhaustion. "They're going to make public the changes they've promised. Policy reforms, anti-bias training, and an overhaul of their hiring practices. They'll also be implementing new diversity measures across the company." Shantae leaned back in her chair, trying to absorb the weight of his words. This was the victory she had fought for, the change she had demanded. Yet, something in her couldn't help but feel a little unsettled. The fight wasn't over, not really. And she wasn't just fighting for policy changes. She was fighting for something deeper, something more personal. "Is that it?" she asked quietly. "Is that all they're offering?" Alan hesitated. "It's a major step forward, Shantae. These changes are groundbreaking in their own right. They're acknowledging systemic racism in a way they've never done before." She ran a hand through her hair, her mind racing. But will they really change? Or will this just be another PR move? "Look, I get it," Alan said, his tone softer now. "You wanted more. You wanted to see consequences for those who perpetuated this culture. But the truth is, you've already won. The people are watching. The board is shaken. The world is paying attention." Shantae's heart still beat hard in her chest. She knew Alan was right, but there was something in the back of her mind, the nagging question she couldn't shake. Had it been enough? She had won accountability, not just policy reforms. She wanted to see the faces of those responsible for the harm, those who would turn a blind eye, finally face the consequences of their actions. "I need more," she said firmly. "This isn't over. Not until the people who allowed this to happen are held accountable." Alan was silent for a moment. "You're asking for a lot, Shantae. The pressure you put on them has already made history. The industry will never be the same. But the real question is, how far are you willing to push?" "I'm willing to push until I see real justice. Until people like me, people of color, are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve in every space, in every industry. I won't stop until I see it happen." Alan sighed. "I'll do what I can to push further. But remember, Shantae, you've already changed the game. Don't let the fight consume you completely. There has to be a balance." Shantae ended the call, her thoughts churning. She had already sacrificed so much, her peace, her relationships, her time, and yet the feeling of unfinished business still lingered. But in the depths of her heart, she knew what she had started could not be undone. Her fight had ignited something bigger than herself. It wasn't just about one airline. It was about changing the course of history. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Monica stepped inside, her expression a mix of concern and pride. "Shantae," Monica began, her voice gentle, "the press conference is scheduled for this afternoon. We're going to announce the terms of the settlement and the new reforms. Are you ready?" Shantae stood, walking to the window and staring out at the city below. The sky was overcast today, a perfect reflection of the turmoil she was feeling inside. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "But this isn't just about making an announcement. It's about showing the world that we are not done, that this fight is just beginning." Monica nodded, a faint smile appearing on her face. "Then let's make sure they hear us." The press conference was held in the Turner Tech Auditorium, and the energy in the room was palpable. The media, the investors, and the public were all waiting to hear Shantae's message. As Shantae stepped up to the podium, the weight of the moment settled around her. She had made it through the hardest part of the battle, but she knew there was more to come. The real challenge now was ensuring that the changes would stick, that they would hold. She cleared her throat, looking out at the sea of faces before her. The cameras clicked, the microphones buzzed with static, and for a moment, everything went quiet. "Today," Shantae began, her voice clear and powerful, "we stand at the threshold of something important. For too long, companies like the one I'm about to announce a settlement would have gotten away with ignoring the humanity of their employees, of their customers, of the people who keep their businesses afloat. We've allowed systems of oppression to dictate who gets to sit at the table, who gets to make the decisions, and who gets to lead. But today, we're changing that. We are making sure that people of color, women, and marginalized communities are no longer left behind. We are holding the powerful accountable." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. "This isn't just about what's on paper or the policies we announce today. This is about showing up every single day to make sure that real change is happening. Change that isn't about tokenism or PR. This is about making sure that every person who feels unheard, who feels unseen, knows that we are fighting for them. I won't stop until the work is done." The room was still, the silence charged with the weight of her statement. Shantae knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would change. Her phone buzzed as she stepped off the stage. It was a message from Marissa. "You did it. You made history. You've already won." Shantae smiled softly, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of pride. She had won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been overlooked, dismissed, and silenced. And now, it was time to make sure the world would never forget. The days after the press conference felt surreal. Shantae had won, but it wasn't the type of victory she had imagined. There was no final moment of triumph, no applause, no singular event that marked the end of the fight. Instead, it was a quiet realization. Change, real change, was a slow process, one that didn't happen overnight. But she had taken the first step. The world had seen her stand, had watched as she refused to accept the system as it was. The airline had followed through with their commitment to overhaul their policies. They had publicly apologized, restructured their hiring practices, and implemented diversity training across all levels of the company. For all the media attention the settlement had garnered, Shantae knew the real work was still to come. Words, after all, were easy. Action was where the true test lay. But what had come as a surprise, what Shantae had never expected, was the shift within her own company. Turner Tech had weathered the storm. The board, while still uncertain, had rallied behind her in a way that shocked even her. And the team she had built, the people who had stood by her through thick and thin, were now united in a common cause, making sure that Turner Tech would not just be a symbol of success, but a beacon of change in the tech world. Her office had become a space of constant motion. Legal documents piled high. Meetings were scheduled back-to-back, and calls were answered with a sense of urgency that was both thrilling and exhausting. But through it all, Shantae remained focused. The road ahead was long, but she had already taken the hardest step. She had stood up, and now the world had to follow. One morning, as she sat reviewing the latest legal filings, her phone buzzed with a message from Monica. "We need to talk. Urgent. Come to my office when you get a chance." Shantae felt a jolt of tension in her chest. She'd gotten used to messages like this. They were never simple, never trivial. Pushing the papers aside, she stood up, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor as she made her way down the hallway to Monica's office. Monica was sitting at her desk, her eyes tired but bright with excitement. The moment Shantae walked in, Monica stood up. "You're not going to believe this," Monica said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "The CEO of a major tech company, one of our competitors, just called. He wants to meet with you. They're offering a partnership." Shantae froze. "A partnership?" Monica nodded. "Yes. He said that after everything that's happened, they want to collaborate with Turner Tech on their diversity initiatives. They want you to help them overhaul their entire corporate structure, bringing the kind of change that we've started here." Shantae's mind raced. It wasn't the first time she had been approached by a rival company. But this was different. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about something bigger, about influence, about using her power to help others. "Did he say what kind of deal they're offering?" Shantae asked carefully. "Not yet, but he's coming to meet with you in person. They want to discuss how you could be involved in reshaping the entire industry, starting with them." Shantae sat back in her chair, her thoughts swirling. It was a huge opportunity, an opportunity to influence not just one company, but an entire sector. She had always dreamed of having this kind of reach, of being able to shape the future of tech with an eye toward equity. But the question lingered. Could she trust them? Could she work with someone who had once been part of the system she had fought so hard against? "I'll take the meeting," Shantae said at last, her voice steady. "But I'm not going in blindly. If they want to work with me, they'll have to show me their commitment, not just make empty promises." Monica gave her a nod of approval. "I think that's the right call. You've got nothing to prove anymore, Shantae. Now, they need to prove themselves to you." Later that week, the meeting took place in a sleek conference room at Turner Tech. The CEO of the rival company, Daniel Rhodes, entered the room with a calm confidence, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of years spent at the helm of a major corporation. He was a man who had built a name for himself on his ability to move in the corridors of power. But now he was here, sitting across from Shantae, in a room that was no longer just about corporate deals. It was about change. Daniel's gaze locked with hers as he extended a hand. "Shantae, thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this is complicated, but I'm hoping we can find common ground." Shantae shook his hand firmly, her eyes never leaving his. She had no illusions about the stakes of this conversation. This wasn't just a business deal, it was a test of whether he was genuinely committed to change, or if he was just another corporate leader trying to capitalize on her success. "I'm listening," Shantae said simply. Daniel nodded. "We've seen what you've done with Turner Tech. We've seen the changes you've driven, the way you've disrupted the system. And frankly, it's inspiring. But we know we can do more together. We want you to help us reshape our company. We need to make real, lasting changes, and we think you're the key to that. We want your guidance on everything from leadership diversity to the implementation of fairer practices across the board." Shantae studied him carefully. She wasn't going to take his words at face value, no matter how polished his presentation was. And what's in this for me, Daniel? What's in it for Turner Tech? Daniel paused, leaning forward slightly. I'm offering you a seat at the table. More than that, a chance to shape the table itself. You'll have influence over our policies, our hiring, and our direction. We'll back you with the full resources of our company. And in return, we're asking you to help us hold ourselves accountable, to ensure that we aren't just paying lip service to diversity and inclusion, but actually making it part of our DNA. Shantae considered his words carefully. She wasn't naive. She knew the power of influence, but she also knew how easily it could be diluted by greed, by ego, by the very system she'd been fighting against. But in this moment, a spark of possibility flickered inside her. This wasn't just about her. This was about opening doors for others, about creating a future where those doors weren't closed before they even had a chance to open. I'll consider your offer, Shantae said, her tone calm but firm. But I need to see more than just words. I need to see action. Daniel didn't hesitate. We're prepared to show you everything. We're ready to do the work. Are you willing to help us? Shantae looked out the window. The city spread out before her. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue across the skyline. It felt like the beginning of something new, something bigger than her, bigger than Turner Tech, bigger than even this deal. She turned back to Daniel, a small smile forming on her lips. Then let's get to work.